Hi, I'm Alex Williams of the New Stack with our series of interviews from the OpenStack Summit in Austin, Texas, brought to you by GoDaddy. GoDaddy is transforming itself with the development of a new stack infrastructure and an OpenStack service for its legions of small business customers. Learn more at GoDaddy.com. Hey, Alex Williams of the New Stack here live from the OpenStack Summit in Austin, Texas, where we are just starting our podcast for the show. Lucky enough to have with us today Wendy Cartee of PLUMgrid and my co-host for the show, Mr. Scott Fulton of the New Stack. Hey,
Good
Scott.
morning, Alex. Good to be here with you.
Hey, Wendy.
Good morning.
So, one of the real goals for us at OpenStack is to get an understanding of what is this new stack of networking? What is this world of the new stack of storage? And it was put well to me yesterday when I was talking with someone who said basically if you think about container-based architectures, you have application packaging, and then you have the infrastructure, and both have a story that goes with containers. So Wendy, tell us about PLUMgrid, and tell us about your thoughts about this new stack of networking, as it relates to what you do and the overall market.
Sure. So PLUMgrid was really started in the era of cloud, and that means all things virtual machine, containers, whatever new technology might become available to developers to develop cloud-based applications. And PLUMgrid really started as a company with this different notion of networking, and PLUM, in fact, is an acronym standing for parse, lookup, update, and modify, which is essentially the four key things you do with packet processing. And the notion that you have to have this grid of the four primary packet forwarding functions is really essential because it really makes networking a invisible infrastructure to applications that may run from containers or may run from virtual machines. And it's really about having this distributed intelligence that is made available to applications no matter where it may be running from in a very distributed manner that really allows application developers to have the seamless, intelligent network that enables them to run their applications without worrying about connectivity, policy, security, etc. So regardless, really, if you're running containers or virtual machines, PLUMgrid was really started with this notion of enabling this new way of networking and enabling a new stack that sits above the networking layer to really enabling applications and workloads and offering this kind of seamless services on the sort of the higher layer of the new stack.
Scott, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, you talked about distributed intelligence. And with respect to containerization, there are a number of methods for distributing intelligence, some of which we've started to see kind of compete with one another in recent years, having to do with overlay networks and the way overlays should be figured out. And because overlay networks are handled differently, security is handled differently. I know you just said that you don't necessarily want PLUMgrid customers to have to think about security as an element, but from a development standpoint, especially in this early stage of containerization, there are a lot of developers who do think of security as an element. So I want to know a little more about PLUMgrid's philosophy with respect to security and how it handles that in containerization on these different styles of overlay networks that we're seeing.
Right, so the distributed intelligence includes networking, and the way we view it is that security has to be built in, it has to be embedded into the networking aspect of building an SDN network. So obviously with SDN, there's separation of the control plane and the data plane. The control plane essentially performs all the algorithms for routing and switching and pushes that into the distributed data plane. But it's really no longer just about connectivity anymore. It's not about having the path for the next route or the next hop for the switch, but it's really about how do you distribute policies, how do you distribute security to ensure that this becomes embedded as part of the networking element in every application, available on a per VM, per container basis. That's really becoming a tool for the application developers more than a connectivity networking tool. So, the way we look at it is, we kind of look at security as part of every single layer in this new stack. And there's a lot of talk about microsegmentation as a new way of providing multi-tenancy, isolating traffic, providing privacy to tenants in a data center. And the microsegmentation has kind of evolved into a way of protecting the data center users from security breaches as well, because in the traditional data center networking model, once a breach passes the perimeters of the standard firewall, the hacker could potentially have access to the entire data center. Whereas if you start doing microsegmentation and really providing microsegmented data centers, if there is a breach, they're contained within that microsegmented domain, if you will, and they don't have access to the entire data center. So the notion of microsegmentation and how it evolved has become very interesting in that it's no longer just about isolating traffic and providing the segmented domain, but it's also become an element of security as well. And within that microsegmented domain, you could further embed security elements such as intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, malware, firewall, and you could start building in layers of security from there on. So I think even within security, it's becoming very layered, very structured in a whole different way that wasn't available to the traditional data center, traditional security model, if you will. So the new stack is very multi-layered, and I think that it's becoming very sophisticated in how we look at everything, not just networking and connectivity and bandwidth, but also security, and how do you embed that in every single layer of the stack? How do you embed policy in every single layer of the stack? And I think that's what's exciting about being part of this revolution right now, that there's a whole new way of looking at these traditional functionalities, because there's a new way of thinking about it, and there's really a need to have more granularity and more control that was really never available before with the traditional models of networking and security.
Now, different vendors have different definitions for the concept of microsegmentation. So I want to make sure that yours and our listeners are on the same page. You're not talking about selective subdomain sharding here or anything like that. You have something specific, more specific in mind with respect to microsegmentation.
Precisely. So this is really about creating, we call it private virtual domains within a data center. And it sits at the SDN overlay layer. It does not require any hardware changes in the data center at all. And these micro-segmented virtual domains can be created on the fly, on demand, by customers without impacting any hardware. So it really gives them a new capability that they didn't have before, which is to be able to segment these domains and define the users and the virtual machines and the containers that reside within each one of these virtual domains, again, on the fly. And they could build virtual topologies for each one of these domains. It's essentially like a micro data center that is completely virtual, and you could define what user traffic goes in, what comes out, the ingress, egress policies, the containers, the virtual machines that belong to that virtual domain, the security, the NAT, the DHCP services, all the VNF that you need can be defined within that virtual domain. And again, this is only available through SDN overlay technologies, and it's a beautiful technology because suddenly now the users can do all this without having to change anything on the hardware. There's no cabling, no rack and stack of any new hardware, and they could do this on the fly. So it's really a new way of empowering data center architects, data center operations staff to be able to do this and be able to do it on the fly, on demand, again, without any tickets, without having any IT personnel go into the data center, change the cabling or rack and stack, or have to reconfigure anything that is in the physical layer.
So when you talk about the new stack of networking, one of the things that comes to my mind is the differentiation between applications and components. And we have existed in this world of application development for quite a while, in terms of this new developer movement around the cloud. But now it seems to be taking on another tone. so to speak. That's more about thinking about how you orchestrate the components themselves, right? And how you build out these microservices architecture environments. And with that comes issues that relate to density and any other number of factors. I'm curious about how you delineate between these application architectures and these more component-based architectures, and how that relates to the networking story that we're starting to hear more about.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I think the whole notion of applications, networking, traditional networking elements, traditional networking functions has all become modularized. And in addition to becoming modularized, it has to be composable on demand. Mm-hmm. It gives, again, the network architects, the users, so much power now in terms of being able to take these modular blocks of applications of traditional network elements that were not modular, and they couldn't compose these topologies on the fly. Traditionally it took months of planning to build out what that topology would look like and how you would configure everything and how you would deploy everything and roll it out. And now you have all these tools at your fingertips. And to be able to, for example, compose a virtual network on the fly, be able to compose the applications that run on top of it, the security policies, is amazingly powerful. And I think that's what's so exciting about the possibilities of what this new stack can offer you. And the whole orchestration aspect of it, you kind of alluded to that as well. The provisioning, the monitoring, the management aspect of how you compose these different elements and how you manage them. I think it's also part of the solution that I think all the different vendors and the communities are looking at as well.
So that speaks to your story about orchestration. And so how do you view the orchestration community right now? How are you integrating with Kubernetes and Mesos and Docker Swarm or any other orchestration platforms that we're starting to see emerge? I'm starting to think, is the orchestration the networking, or is the networking the orchestration?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we started developing a SDN plugin for Docker. We've become an ecosystem technology partner for the Docker community. So we're bringing all the concepts of microsegmentation, distributed intelligence, security policies, etc., to the Docker community as well. And we're enabling the container technology, whether it's Docker or Mesos or Kubernetes, to be able to leverage all the benefits of an SDN overlay by offering these plugins on GitHub and offering users the opportunity to experience all the benefits of SDN networks that could be made available to them. From an orchestration perspective, we're working with all the orchestration efforts out there, Docker Swarm, Mesosphere perhaps. And the users, I think, right now are really playing with different orchestration technologies, and we want to enable them to be able to experience fully the entire power of all these different orchestration models that's out there. And so it's important for us to make this SDN capability available to them, make sure that it works with the orchestration that's also available to them, and really being a part of that entire solution, so that as they're thinking about this new way of developing applications, the new way of having connectivity and all the policies that's associated with it, they're experiencing a full solution and making a decision in terms of what are the pros and cons of each approach, and give us feedback, give us vendors feedback about what's working and what's not working, so we could take that feedback and immediately look at how to improve upon it, through the open source community, through things that perhaps we could develop for them. And I think it's exciting to look at how this technology is going to evolve from that angle, because there's so many possibilities, and I think so many ideas and new ways of doing things are emerging right now. And I think that's why everybody's so excited about the technology and the era that we're in today.
You talked earlier about embedding security into the network. A couple of years ago, PLUMgrid made news as to how it started doing that with respect to not using one of the more common encryption components in networking, SSL. Of course, SSL has been, secure sockets layer has been panned from time to time as not being adequate for any number of reasons. PLUMgrid's approach to this involves VXLAN, and perhaps you might be able to help kind of distinguish as it was explained at the time, PLUMgrid was implementing security not just through encryption, but through the way it was routing the overlay networks. And perhaps you could explain a little more about that.
VXLAN is a way of providing a tunneling mechanism from the hypervisor all the way to the endpoint. And the endpoint could be another hypervisor or it could be a gateway. And VXLAN actually is agnostic to different encryption techniques. So if a customer, for example, has SSL or SSH or IPsec, all those technologies can run in a VXLAN environment. What we are doing different is really being able to embed these types of security functions in the kernel space and being able to run it in kernel space through a technology that we upstream into the Linux kernel called IOVisor. The developers know it as extended BPF. There is a lot of development happening in terms of embedding the networking functions, the security functions, the analytics, performance monitoring functions in the kernel space. And IOVisor is really focused on, how do you virtualize these types of functions as IO modules, have users perhaps develop them in the user space and then run them in the kernel space for performance, for faster accessibility to packet filter functions that's already available in the kernel space, and being able to leverage a lot of that technology in the kernel space to virtualize it and quickly make it available again to application developers, etc. So that's part of embedding the security concept, is providing VXLAN as the connectivity fabric, but allowing encryption technologies to run on top, and then embedding security and performance and analytics functions into the kernel space of every single server that is running containers or virtual machines, hypervisors, etc. And every server is going to have a Linux operating system, and in being embedded as part of the kernel really empowers the community to be able to leverage that regardless what the next technology may be for them to run their applications in.
Well, Wendy, there's so much to explore on this area of networking and what the new stack of networking really is going to look like. And so we really appreciate your time today and coming and explaining it a bit with us. We look forward to keeping in touch, and best of luck with PLUMgrid.
Thank you so much, and I love the new stack. I read it all the time, and I highly recommend it to users and readers out there to continue, because this is all that's all about right now. It's the new stack that's emerging, and it's exciting to have you guys cover the space. So thank you very much for your great work.
Well, we thank you very much. And Scott, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Wendy.